Did you get results from your? Welcome to the Powerful Moment Sunday School class this morning. We're glad you're here. This is, we're recognizing Palm Sunday this morning. So this is the Sunday that of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The Sunday before, obviously, Easter Sunday, next Sunday. So again, we're glad you are here this morning. So for folks who are looking online, I know, or I was told Gail and Jeff Phillips are watching online. I think there are others. So there was a question about how do we access the handouts if you're watching online. So you go to the HopeLebanon.com website, HopeLebanon.com website. There's a tab there that says SS Lessons, Sunday School Lessons, SS Lessons. Then when you click on that, you go to Lessons. And then at Lessons, you'll see Encourage Group Lessons. And then there are different tabs for different years. Go to 2025, the tab 2025. And then for this morning, you would see the lesson Genesis 31, 1 through 13, 30, 25 through 43, and 31, 14 through 21. So click on the handout there, and it will bring up the handout for you. Now, when I looked this morning, because I'm always tardy and slow in getting through the lessons, we're about 2 weeks behind. I think it said March something or another for this lesson. So anyway, so don't pay attention to the date necessarily. But if you're keeping up online, I'll try to get those dates corrected and to where we are now. But try to, when you hear what the verses are, the chapter, what we're studying, then you can click on that once you get there online. So again, one more time, go to HopeLebanon.com, SS Lessons, then Encourage Group Lessons, 2025, and then the book, Genesis, and the verses. Okay? So hopefully that's helpful. Next Sunday, we're going to veer off and do an Easter lesson. So we're going to take a week off from Genesis and do an Easter lesson, and then the following week we'll come back to Genesis once again until we get through probably chapter 36 in Genesis, and then we'll go into a study of the church at Ephesus and Paul's interaction with the Ephesians. Okay? So that's where we're going. All right. Any questions on website, lessons, where we are, where we're going? Okay, good. So again, any updates, prayer requests this morning? As I said, yeah. Okay. Debbie's husband is having a PET scan on. Oh, Melinda's husband. I'm sorry, Melinda's husband. Excuse me. Melinda's husband is having a PET scan on Thursday. I'm totally confused. Thursday. So it's the routine checkup that he has for the PET scan. Just pray that everything continues to be clear, no cancer is found. So. With that, Jeff had surgery this week on his hand, but he's here, so that's good news. Glad to see him here, and that went well as can be expected. I mentioned Jeff and Gail Phillips. Martha, you want to give an update? You talked to Gail yesterday or day before.
She said that they have an appointment in May. I think she said May the 6th. And that will determine whether or not he has to have surgery. So right now, he's still weeks away from even knowing what's going to happen. And he still has 2 tubes. One was removed. He did have 3. And so anyway, she's working, I think, most days except Sunday right now. And so just keep them in your prayers.
And there is a meal train for Gail and Jeff, so if I don't know if it's all signed up yet or not, but look out there for that. And you can do meals. I think there's also a gift card opportunity for just different restaurants out there. If that's easier, better for you, they put that out there as an option. And so I was going to say something. Oh, the surgery, Martha mentioned, the potential for surgery Jeff has is a removal of a kidney. So that's what they're trying to determine if that's going to be the next step or not. So, okay.
He only has 5%. The kidney's only functioning at 5% right now.
Yeah. So keep them in your prayers. Then Linda's here again, so we're glad to see her out. Trying to think of anybody else I need to think of. Nona, your brother's still doing well? So Nona's brother, Tommy, they found 2 spots on his lung, so they're looking into that. So otherwise doing pretty. From the esophagus radiation and tests, they came off good. So he's doing good from that right now. Oh, Michael Lewis. I texted with Michael. He's home, went home Friday night, I think it was. So LaToya said he's doing much better and had a encouraging response, I guess you would say. So hopefully that's continued through the weekend. So thank you for asking. Okay. Seems like I had, after the service today, or during the service today, I'm not sure how this will proceed time-wise, but there's going to be a special time of prayer for Terry Comet. So it will be a biblically based time of prayer. The pastor will explain more about that as we get to that time. So, okay. So I saw that she was here today, so that's good that she's able to be out. So. Okay, anything else? Oh, special music today, right? Yeah, special Easter music today. And the Jesus film is Friday night, 7 o'clock. The pastor's promised refreshments, but he's not saying what yet, I don't think. So, and then also this week is the Holy Week service at Cumberland Presbyterian. And Pastor Will is preaching tomorrow for that service. And is it at noon or 11:30? I forget. Do we know what time it is, somebody? Noon. So Cindy's looking. Does it say, Cindy? Noon. It is noon. Thank you. So noon, and they'll have a Holy Week service, I think, every day, correct? Every weekday this week. So, all right, a lot of stuff. Anything else I've forgotten? Okay, great. All right, who'd like to open us in prayer then this morning? Okay, it's up to you, Ken. Amen. Thank you, Ken. All right, with that, just a little bit of a refresher as we're moving through Genesis chapter 30 and then parts of 31. So last week we studied the end of the story. So we had a flashback last week to see the end of the story, and we're going to pick up this week kind of with the beginning of the story. But last week Jacob was told by God to return to Bethel. And Jacob had been working for Laban now for 6 years. That was the end of the story, a total of 20 years. Now we're going back up today in the flashback 6 years when he's been working for 14 years, because we're going, again, back to the beginning a little bit. So Laban had tried to cheat Jacob over this time that he had worked for him by changing his wages during this 6 years 10 times. So we said last week that could have been 14 different birthing periods of sheep and goats. So Laban tried to change, or did change, Jacob's wages almost every time sheep and goats were to be born. So Jacob, although God was blessing him, Jacob still became very wealthy, even though Laban was trying to cheat him out of his wages. Now, so we go today to Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 through 30, and it tells us how did we get to that flashback as such. So with that, Martha, if you would read those verses, Genesis 30, 25 through 30.
Now it came about when Rachel had given birth to Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away so that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you yourself know my service which I have rendered you." But Laban said to him, "If it pleases you at all, stay with me. I have determined by divination that the Lord has blessed me on your account." He continued, "Name your wages, and I will give them." But Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?"
Okay, so Jacob has now worked for Laban for 14 years. And what is Jacob's request to Laban in first part of those verses? Let me go. Jacob wants to return to his, quote, homeland. So why do you think Jacob made this request to Laban at this time? Rachel just had a baby. I think that is certainly one reason. That baby, who was that baby? Joseph. So Rachel had just had Joseph, and this was Jacob's favorite son. So Jacob could have very well wanted to raise Joseph in a very different environment, in the environment of the Promised Land, versus here where he was in Paddan-aram. So Jacob could have also wanted his children, not only Joseph, but his other children, to get to know their grandfather Isaac and possibly their grandmother Rebekah. We don't know if Rebekah's still alive at this point or not, because the Bible doesn't tell us if she's still alive. So this first reason is really not so different from reasons we see people wanting to move today, to get back closer to family, to raise their family in a more family-friendly environment, to raise their children maybe close to relatives, close to grandparents. So not an unusual reason at all. So
but then God told him to.
And God told him to return to the Promised Land. So in Genesis 28:15, God had promised Jacob, "Behold, I'm with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I've done what I have promised you." So God appears here to be leading Jacob to claim his promise that God had made him some 14 years earlier, back in Genesis chapter 28, verse 15. So what else? There's another reason too, maybe. May not want his children to be around Laban again. Not a good environment, and we'll see later, maybe it's not only around Laban, but other negative influences that could be a part of what his children were experiencing. Laban says Laban's attitude toward Jacob had changed, and not only Laban, but who else's attitude? His sons. And why did it change? Yeah, they were jealous. We talked about it. They were jealous, envious. They could see that Jacob was being blessed by God, so he was becoming wealthy, and they were jealous and envious because they considered that his wealth was taken away from Laban's and Laban's sons' wealth. So what is one other reason there in chapter 30, verse 30? What's it say? Wanted to provide for his own family. Here he's been working for Laban for all these years and providing wealth for Laban and his family, and now he says basically it's time that I want to provide for my own family. So to be self-sufficient as such. So is the desire to want to provide for your own family a selfish desire? No. Why do you say that? What we're told to do in the Bible. Right, Jill's got it. The Bible says so, right? Jill, where does it say that? Jesus. Where does it say that? We're really going to test you now. 10 Commandments. Close, but not quite, Jill. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So, as Jill said, the Bible tells us so. So it's not a selfish desire on the part of Jacob. He is really following the direction of God here, which Martha mentioned earlier. In Genesis 30:28, Laban says, name your wages and I will give them. So do you really think Laban was going to follow through on his offer? No. So I don't think so either. We've already learned that Laban had cheated Jacob 10 times, so no reason to think that this wasn't a trick and he was going to try to cheat Jacob again. So why was Laban so intent on having Jacob remain in his employ? He was a cash cow, exactly. Jacob was the cash cow, and he was generating a lot of cash cows, I guess, so too. So thank you, Karen. So with that, in Genesis, 30:27 tells us, Laban said, the Lord has blessed me on your account. So Laban selfishly wanted Jacob to remain to benefit himself and his sons and such, and increase Laban's wealth. So how did Laban determine he had been blessed by Joseph? The demons told him so. And how did the demons tell him so, Ken?
Divination is an occult communication.
Yeah.
I suspect, jumping ahead, that's why Rachel took those items
Yeah.
to shut off his intel.
Yeah. So Ken is jumping ahead, answering a future question, so I'm not sharing that, Ken. I'm just sharing the first part of it. Anyway, yes, he learned, as Ken said, the demons told him so, and the demons told him so through divination. So how do we know divination is demons' work, as Ken would say? Jill? That word comes from division? Divination. That's as Ken said, calling on demons to determine, D-I-V-I-N-A-T-I-O-N, not division.
I think in various places throughout the Old Testament, God condemns that.
Yeah, God condemns that throughout various places in the Old Testament, as Stan says. So, again, Jill, the Bible tells us so, right? So where does it tell us so? although the law had not yet been given by this point, but the Levitical law in chapter 19, verse 26 of Leviticus says, "You shall not eat any meat with the blood. You shall not practice divination nor soothsaying." So, again, later on, God makes a specific law against that because, as Ken said, it's the demons told me so. The devil told me so, right? The devil told me to do it. So, all right, so here the demons told Laban that he was being blessed because of Jacob. So what do you think Satan's purposes might have been on this occasion to have Laban try to retain Jacob?
Probably prevent the birth of Jesus.
Yeah, to prevent the birth of Jesus. Laban could have retained Jacob. It could have been Satan's plan to somehow to divert God's plan to have the Messiah, Jesus, to come through the descendants of Jacob and upset God's whole plan of salvation. And we see throughout history, prior to the birth of Jesus, Satan using different methods multiple times to try to divert God's plan for the birth of our Savior Jesus. Okay. All right, moving on. Martha, Genesis chapter 30, verses 31 through 34. If you'd read those verses, please.
So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled or spotted sheep and every black sheep among the lambs, and the spotted for the speckled among the goats, and those shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come concerning my wages. Every one that is not speckled or spotted among goats or black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen." And Laban said, "Good, let it be according to your word." So he removed on that day the striped or spotted male goats and all the speckled or spotted female goats, every one with white on it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and put them in the care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. So in these verses, Martha gave you, I think, some extra verses there. We learned that the deal was made between Jacob and Laban. So what did Laban ask Jacob in Genesis 30:31? Yeah, what shall I give you? What can I give you? What will it take for you to stay as such? So, do you see anything ironic in Laban's offer to Jacob? Had Laban given Jacob anything to this point?
That's what I always thought. I looked at it, I'm like, well, the boy has worked for 14 years at this point.
Yeah, I think so. I think Laban's offer here is ironic, just as Jamie's saying, that Laban had not given Jacob anything. He'd worked for 14 years. Jacob had to work for what he had gotten to this point, including his wives, Rachel and Leah, had worked 7 years for each of them. So here Laban is saying, he is insinuating he's given Jacob something, and in reality Jacob has worked for it. So what was Jacob's response to Laban? What's that? Yeah, you don't need to give me anything. You shall not give me anything. You don't need to give me anything. And I can how do you, when you visualize Jacob in this conversation with Laban, this interaction with Laban, what do you think his demeanor is? Had enough of it. What'd you say, Donna?
I said defensive.
Defensive. I think he realizes the environment he's in, certainly, because, I mean, he knows there's idol worship going on. and he knows what kind of guy Laban is. Now, if he specifically knew that Laban had determined that from divination, I don't know. It doesn't say. So I think he could surmise that it could have possibly been that way. Anybody else got insight? Good question on that. Okay. I think when Laban told Jacob this, I think Jacob was just kind of laughing. I think he thought, You're ridiculous here. I've worked 14 years and you ain't given me diddly squat, and you're saying now that you're going to give me something? Why should I believe that? And I think he's kind of laughing at his response, because I suspect Jacob was very dubious or suspicious of Laban saying that I will give you something. So Jacob said, I will work for what it is to make me stay longer. So Jacob here is kind of determining that, hey, I know you've not given me anything. I don't expect you to give me anything, and I'll work for whatever it is. So what's the deal that Jacob proposed to Laban? He wants the spotted, the speckled, and all the black sheep. All the dark sheep. So he says, I will take all the spotted and speckled sheep and goats and the dark lambs, the black lambs, the black sheep. So how did Laban then respond to Jacob's proposal of this? The deal. Let it be. He says, good. Let it be according to your word. Let it be according to Jacob's word. Jamie, do we have another extra handout for them? Give that to me over there. Thank you. You got two there. Thank you. I think it's 3. Sorry. Got handouts, Ricky. Okay. So get back to, So Laban seemed to be pretty pleased with the deal, didn't he? He said, let it be according to your word there in Genesis 30:34. So why would Laban be so pleased with the deal proposed by Jacob? It's only a few of them, yeah. So Laban again thinks he's got the best of Jacob. In the Near Eastern world, sheep are ordinarily white and goats are ordinarily black. So speckled and spotted sheep and goats are very rare. So there's only a few of them. Laban thought he had, again, outsmarted Jacob, and he had gotten the better of the deal in this negotiation as such with Jacob. So how would you characterize Laban's actions and his dealings with Jacob? Sneaky and what? Greedy. Sneaky, greedy. Yeah, I said a conniver, a schemer, a deceiver, underhanded, all those, what Jill said, all those I think might describe Laban and his intentions here. So what did Jacob agree to in Genesis 30:33? Yeah, so what, in terms of today, what did Jacob agree to? He agreed to basically what we would call an audit or an inspection today. He says, Laban, come on, you can inspect my flocks, and anytime you find any non-spotted or speckled sheep in here and so forth, you know I've cheated you and you can take them. So he says, my honesty will testify for me. So as President Reagan said, trust but verify. So Jacob was willing to allow Laban, I don't know that Laban trusted him, but at least to verify. He was saying, come audit and inspect whenever you would like. So why would Jacob agree to what he agreed to? Why would he agree to this inspection and audits as such? Wait. He being, no, he was really saying, I'll do as my word says, and you can come and check it out and inspect and audit and make sure I'm doing that. So he was really putting the impetus, I guess you would say, on Laban to just verify that that Jacob was honestly dealing with Laban. Okay, so why would Jacob agree to what he agreed to in Genesis chapter 30, verse 33? What's that? He knows he's not going to cheat anybody. He had a plan. Yeah, he had a plan. Who was Jacob beginning to trust here? Whose plan was this really? It's really God's plan. We see Jacob's life, although he continues to have ups and downs, we'll see Jacob's life, he is moving through sanctification, you might say, and he is getting somewhat more sanctified as time goes on, and he was beginning to trust more in God's plan for his life. So Jacob was putting behind him. Jacob wasn't the most honest person in the world, was he? And he had been part of some deception in the past. So here with this change of attitude, come inspect, come and audit what I'm doing. We're seeing that he is putting some of his deception and dishonesty behind him to some degree. Okay? All right, Martha, read on 35 through 43, please.
35 or 37?
35. Maybe I wrote down the wrong numbers on your handout. I'm sorry.
So he removed on that day the striped or spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white on it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and put them in care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. How far did you say?
Through 43.
Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar, almond, and plane trees, and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white that was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the drinking troughs, that is, in the watering channels where the flocks came to drink. And they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks delivered striped, speckled, and spotted offspring. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the side of the flock in the drinking troughs, so that they would mate by the rods. But when the flock was sickly, he did not put them in, so the sickly were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys.
All right, thank you, Mark. So what was done, in just looking at verses 35 and 36 of Genesis chapter 30, what was done? He separated the speckled and spotted goats, and the sheep and black sheep were separated from the rest of the flock. Who did the separation? Who do you think? Look, read carefully. Laban and his sons did, because they didn't trust. Well, I'm thinking this, it's not said, but I think because he was a deceiver and a schemer, and Jacob had been a deceiver and schemer, that Laban and his sons separate the sheep and the goats. So he didn't want Jacob to have the opportunity to get a sheep or a goat that wasn't supposedly going to be his. So what else happened in those verses? Well, after he separates the sheep and the goats, what's he do? He continued, yes, Jacob continued to work for Laban, and they did one other thing there in those verses. Yeah, they put a distance of 3 days between Laban's flocks and Jacob's flocks. Again, kind of a lack. I don't want these flocks intermingling, so We don't want any chance to have any more spotted or speckled sheep around here or goats, so we're going to put 3 days in between them. So what did Jacob do then in verses 37 through 43 to increase his wealth? Alice said something about this a minute ago. Jacob had a what? He had a plan. Jacob had a plan, and he then worked his plan. It's been said, fail to plan, then plan to fail. So Jacob comes up with this plan. So this plan of Jacob's had 4 specific parts to it. What were the components of Jacob's plan? Through those verses, 37 through 43. He placed some peeled branches, some rods in the water channels where the sheep bred. That was one part of his plan. He did what? He had which of the flocks mated too? He only had part of the flocks mate. They delivered the striped, speckled, and spotted, but which flocks mated? Only the healthy ones, only the strong ones did he allow to mate. He separated out the weak ones, so that was part of his plan, yeah. So what else did he do? 2 other parts. He placed these rods and branches in the water, but then what did he have the sheep and the lambs and the sheep and the goats do? Where were they facing? Somebody saying it? He faced them. Yeah, he separated lambs, made the flocks face toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. So he pointed them in the right direction as such. And then he put his own herds apart. Remember, Joseph here is working for Laban, so he's still working for him. So he made sure he separated his flocks, Joseph's flocks, from Laban's flocks. Jacob, who did I say Joseph? I'm sorry, Jacob. Excuse me, Jacob. So what was the result of Jacob's plan? He was prosperous. Genesis 30:43 tells us that so the man, Jacob, became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. So he had such large flocks as such that he was able to buy some camels. He's able to buy some donkeys. He was able to buy some servants as such. So he became extremely or very wealthy. So true or false? The striped branches Jacob placed in the water channel was an ingenious plan and resulted in the success of the plan. Everybody good with true on that? Nancy shaking her head. Nancy? Yeah. Nancy thinks God prospered him, and I agree with Nancy. So God produced a blessing on Jacob. This plan was totally crazy. I mean, that just cause some sheep face a bunch of rods that are striped. That doesn't mean they're going to have... What's that? It might have been God-inspired, maybe, but I think the end result, God produced the results. So how do we know that, though? Why would we think that? How do we know the results of Jacob's plan was produced by God? God told him to get out of there. Yeah. So to the point, look at Genesis 31:11 through 13. Martha, did I give you those verses? Genesis 31:11 through 13. Okay, if you'd read those.
The angel of the Lord said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I answered, Here am I. And he said, Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land.
So what does that verse say God saw? What Laban had been doing to Jacob, that God had seen Laban was basically cheating Jacob. So then God had blessed Laban because of Jacob, but God is fulfilling his promise to Jacob and his covenant with Abraham, Jacob's grandfather. So again, I think this plan is his plan. He could have said, make all the purple spotted ones, or what. I mean, he could have said anything about these sheep and goats, but it was God who produced the results. It's God who produces the results in our lives as well. Sometimes we have what looks to be crazy plans, but if we're dependent upon God and his direction in our lives, then that's where success will come from.
I think there's probably some confusion about all these poplar, almond, and plane trees, but Alice says in her Bible, there's a footnote about it.
To stimulate the animals to reproduce is what those things did. Says Jacob placed partially striped branches from certain trees in the watering troughs to stimulate the animals to reproductive activity.
Yeah. So Alice's Bible's note says that these striped trees and so forth were fertility drugs that they put in basically in the water. So maybe so. I don't know, but if that's the case, why aren't we using it today? I guess we got better fertility drugs today, don't we? So I don't know. But it just seems in this day and time kind of crazy, but maybe that was true. Maybe that's the way it happened. But again, the results are from God. So the results, he was following God's plan, what he had told him. So even though it seems, at least to me, kind of crazy, but it was God's plan. So, all right, so God's ways are not our ways, are they? His ways are higher than our ways. All right, Martha, read on Genesis 31:14 through 16, please.
Rachel and Leah said to him, "Do we still have any share or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has told you."
Okay, so now we're kind of flashing forward again. We flash back to right before the 6-year period when the speckled and spotted lamb plan came to fruition and so forth, which we saw that they then were getting ready to head out of Padan-aram. And these verses tell us the result of Jacob's consultation with Rachel and Leah concerning the situation that Jacob faced with Laban, with Rachel and Leah's father. So Jacob's plan, his overall plan, begins to take shape, and here we flashed forward from where we were in Genesis chapter 30. So how did Rachel and Leah respond to Jacob's question to leave Padan-aram and return to, or go to the promised land, for Jacob to return to the promised land and for them to go there? What was their response?
They're all for it.
They're all for it. So what did they specifically say? Yeah, that Laban had taken their inheritance, first of all, so that didn't make them very happy, did it? What else did they say? How were they treated? They were treated as foreigners, regarded as foreigners, or we might say outsiders by their own father, Laban. And then, thirdly, what did he say? What did they say? Excuse me. They sold us. Rachel and Leah were sold for Jacob's labor. And what did they get out of it? What's it? A lot of babies. I got some babies, but otherwise they didn't get anything out of it. They said that their wealth had been taken. They had not been been benefited from the wealth that Laban had acquired because of Jacob. So to whom did Rachel and Leah attribute Laban's financial setback? To God. It says Rachel and Leah recognized that God was in control and had reduced Laban's wealth. So as a result, they told Jacob to do whatever God was telling Jacob to do. That we will stick with you, basically. All right, let's read on. Genesis 31, 17 through 21.
Then Jacob stood up and put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all of his livestock and all of his property, which he had acquired. The livestock he possessed, which he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his flock, and Rachel stole the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing. So he fled with all that he had, and he got up and crossed the Euphrates River and set out for hill country of Gilead.
All right, thank you. So as a result of Rachel and Leah giving Jacob the thumbs up to do what God was leading him to do, what did Jacob then do? He did what? Loaded everybody up. He called the worldwide moving van, got all packed up and ready to go, all his belongings, including his vast herds, his wives, his children. And he heads to the land of his father. He heads to Canaan. Okay, so Genesis 31:20 says, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean. This phrase is literally translated, and he stole the heart of Laban. So how did Jacob steal Laban's heart? He's moving away with Laban's daughters. Who else is he moving away with? Grandchildren, with Laban's grandchildren. So we just talked about earlier how often do we hear grandparents moving to be close to their grandchildren. Here, Jacob is taking Laban's grandchildren away from him. So do you think that's really why he felt like Laban's heart had been stolen? No. So what's that, Laurie? All his property and livestock. His hard workers. Who was going to be a big part of his workforce anyway? His grandson. So here Jacob's taking his grandsons away from Laban, his workforce. So, and what else who else was leaving? Who was the prime person who was leaving? Jacob. He was the goose that laid the golden egg, right? So now he's leaving, and by whatever means, Laban recognized that Jacob was the source of his wealth, and now he's leaving. So Laban isn't too happy about that. So why do you think Jacob did not tell Laban he was leaving? Might do something to try to stop him or detain him. What's happened during the prior 20 years? Yeah, another 7 years here. Yeah, so he held him for 7 years to first thinking he was marrying Rachel, and he married Leah. Then he held him for 7 years to marry Rachel. And then they worked out this business arrangement for him to be there 6 more years to work for him. So all in all, he had detained him now for 20 years. So Jacob was concerned that Laban would hook up some new scheme to keep Jacob in Paddan Aram and serving Laban. So Genesis 31:20 is literally translated, and he stole the heart of Laban. So Laban's heart was stolen, and Rachel steals something of her father's. What did Rachel steal, and why do you think she stole? She stole the idols. Rachel stole Laban's household items. So why did she steal them? They were special to him, being Laban. she could still be she could still be caught up in this, excuse me? Yeah, she could still, she could still be caught up in idol worship and think that these idols would have given them safe travel, safe passage back to the promised land. What other reasons? That could be. Yeah. Ken says he didn't want those idols telling Jacob telling Laban where they were going. So maybe so. Yeah, it could have been that powerful. Didn't think about that. That's good. Yeah. What else? She was mad at her father and because of how he treated her. So why would taking his idols? They were valuable, exactly. These idols were probably thought to be made out of precious stones and gold and silver, so these were expensive items that she had taken. So this is maybe a way, you remember she said, we have not benefited at all from our inheritance, the wealth that Laban had. So here she might have been taking things in their own hands by taking the idols. So it's possibly revenge also for how Laban had treated her husband. So this could be just a common response for crime is revenge. So this might have been revenge. So what's the word used in Genesis 31:21 to describe Jacob and his household leaving Padan-aram? They fled. So what does the use of this word fled imply to you? I'm sorry, I guess. What, Nancy? You're running away from something. Is that, Laurie, what you said? Running away for something. So why do you think, what was their motivation for running away? What? Running away before he realized. I think they were fearful again that he might somehow stop them. I think even though God had told them, told Jacob, return home, return to Bethel, this is somewhat of a sign of unbelief here. So we see Jacob kind of falling back again a little bit here, that he did not trust God to face Laban, to go face to face with Laban and telling him, I'm hitting the road. So instead of doing that, he goes on the lamb. And I spelled that L-A-M-B. Martha corrected me as L-A-M, but it's a little play on words there. Go on the lamb, L-A-M-B, right? He took those lambs with him. So, but anyway, he's gone on the lamb here back to, for him, back to, hopefully, eventually, the promised land. So Isaiah 28:16 says, whoever believes will not act hastily. Whoever believes will not act hastily. Well, in some sense, you might say, well, Jacob didn't act hastily. He spent 20 years there. In that sense, he didn't. But in the sense that he tries to get out of Dodge here in the dark of night, basically, he was acting hastily. Warren Wiersbe says, it isn't enough to know and do the will of God. We must also do his will in the way he wants it done, the way that will glorify him the most. Do you think the way that Jacob was leaving was the way that glorified God the most? No. He deceived Laban, so he fled. And Nancy had said earlier, by him fleeing, it was an act of running. He was running away. So I think God had promised him he was going to return. The right way to have done that is go tell Laban face to face, we're leaving. We're not sticking around any longer. So again, as Warren Wiersbe says, it isn't enough to know and do the will of God. Jacob knew the will of God. He was kind of doing the will of God in a roundabout way. But we must also do His will in the same way He wants it done, the way that will glorify Him the most. I think the way that would glorify Him the most is to go to Laban and say, God is in control of my life. The demons are in control of your life. Do you want to know how to be controlled by the one true God? That way he could have been a witness and stand up. But he chose a different way. So Jacob escaped, headed across the Euphrates River in the hills of Gilead, and with his family and his possessions in tow. He would be traveling today. He would be traveling through modern-day Syria and south into Jordan, which is where the hills of Gilead are. So in today's lesson, we've looked at the plan and the escape. In the next lesson, when we get back to Genesis, we'll look at the crisis and contentment. Okay? So what's the takeaways or personal applications from today's lesson? Excuse me. God, what'd you say? God has a plan? God has a plan. What are we supposed to do with His plan? Follow it. God has a plan and follow His plan. What else? Past behavior is an indication of future performance. Oh, I never heard that way. Past behavior is an indication of future performance. Very good. Did you just come up with that, Nancy? No. Say that. Say that again on the air.
What I told you?
Yep.
Okay, that past behavior is an indication of future performance.
And then what did you tell Laura?
And I told her with
Laurie.
Laban, and then she said also with Jacob.
That's
That's right.
That how was their past performance an indication?
That he wasn't going to change.
Wasn't going to change. Yeah. What else? Anything else? Very good. That was excellent. Up, hold on. I can tell I don't want to repeat all this.
I think this whole event, everything in there, is a foreshadowing of the Hebrews leaving Egypt. And so you find the same process taking place there.
I hadn't thought about that. Very good. It's kind of a foreshadowing of the Israelites leaving Egypt. Y'all watched the Ten Commandments last night. So is it a foreshadowing, Becky? Yes, she says yes, it is. So yeah, so it's verified Jeff's statement. Well, yeah, when they got to the Red Sea, yeah, they felt pretty fearful. Yeah, after the 10 plagues, they felt pretty confident until the army showed up. Then the Egyptian army showed up. Then they didn't feel so confident, did they? So, isn't that the way the movie played out back? Yeah. Okay. What else? Anything else? I got several here. Let's see what I got. So it's Psalm 118:8 says, "It's better to take refuge in the Lord than trust in people." In Genesis 28:15, what was told to Jacob was, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." So there, it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in people. So instead of trusting in Laban, which was not very trustworthy, to say the least, Jacob began to trust in the Lord. Psalm 37:6 says, "He will bring out your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday." We see this principle played out in Genesis 30:33. "My honesty will answer for me." Wouldn't that be a great answer for all of us when we're in a negotiation, a conversation? My honesty will answer for me. And then it says when God gives us a command, it's not without His promise of being with us. God gives us commands, but He also promises to be with us to accomplish His commands. It's always a wise, way back in last week's lesson, it's always a wise decision to consult with your spouse concerning major decisions, what Jacob did with Rachel and Leah. Adrian Rogers says we'll find God right where we left Him. Jacob had left God in Bethel. God had always been there, although God is everywhere, but God had always identified God with places at that time. God had not left. Jacob had kind of wandered off in unbelief. Now he's returning. And question, are you using Anne Graham Lotz 4 landing lights and making decisions? Are you willing to have all your actions audited and inspected as Jacob was? Jacob had a plan, even might have been a little bit crazy, in my opinion. Jacob had a plan, and he worked his plan. So it's been said it failed to plan, then plan to fail. Isaiah 28:16 says, whoever believes will not act hastily. Trust in God's timing. And we said just a minute ago, Warren Wiersbe says it isn't enough to know and do the will of God. We must also do His will in the way He wants it done, the way that will glorify Him the most. So how do we see hope in today's lesson? We see hope that God's plans cannot be thwarted. God's plans cannot be thwarted. Satan was attempting to use Laban to thwart God's plan for a Messiah to change the course of history. As always, Satan loses and God wins. So, thanks. Sorry, I'm a minute over. I owe you a minute. So, y'all have a blessed week. See you next week. He is risen. Very good.